Hello, everyone. This is Coach Jackie Zach, and I'm excited to have Brian Sammons, the owner of Twisted Path Distillery, with us today. His twisted path of a career started with a career in intelligence in Washington, D.C. He was a Department of Defense employee detailed to the CIA to work on the Osama bin Laden team as an analyst from before 9/11 to a few years after, kind of like Jack Ryan, right? He then went into the clandestine service of the CIA, which is what most people call being a spy, where he was a counterintelligence operations officer. A few years later, he went on leave from the CIA to go to law school at the University of Wisconsin, my alma mater, where he met his wife, Laura. They decided to raise a family, so he resigned from the agency and they moved to Milwaukee. He worked as a criminal prosecutor in the Milwaukee District Attorney's Office for a few years, then briefly in a big law firm before he and his wife decided to chase the dream. They turned the hobby of distilling into a career. He built the distillery in an old warehouse near their home in Bayview, designed and built his first still, which he has a patent for the novel heating system it uses. 11 years later, they're still growing and the dream is alive. Uh, one of the other one of the things he loves to do in his free time is anything with his wife and four kids. Kids range from ages from 3 to 11. So it could be things like Legos, mountain biking, riding, going to the zoo. Anything can be fun, right? So something he's most proud of besides your kids is the Twisted Path Distillery's Bloody Vodka and Chai Liqueur. They are both completely novel. There's nothing else like them, and they're amazing. And I cannot wait to try them since is right near my house. The Bloody Vodka is entirely backwards from how everyone else makes a Bloody Mary. It's the perfect example of the twisted path approach to something. It's my pleasure to welcome Brian Sammons to the show. Hey, Brian.
Hello.
It's
Thank you
great
for
to
having
have you.
me.
I feel like I am. I'm talking to a real live Jack Ryan over here.
If there is such a thing.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm very, like I said, I don't live very far from your from Bayview, so I am very excited to stop in and try some of your especially the chai liqueur. So anyway, but that's
Yeah.
not why we're here. We are here to talk a lot about you. So let's tell us, your personal story, you know, anything personal about you.
Well, so you gave a good rundown on my career path. I'm originally from Milwaukee,
Hmm.
and I started on that path with counterterrorism in mind after college. I went to UWM undergrad because it just the targeting civilians of terrorism that just really bothered me, and so I decided I wanted to fight terrorism. So I moved to DC to seek that, and so that's how that all started. But part of the concept behind Twisted Path is the whole idea of follow your own path. Don't worry about conventional wisdom and what other people think or do, or all one career ladder or anything like that. Follow your own path. And so that's kind of how I've always rolled. So that's why it's just a little bit weird. Some of these twists and turns have been a little bit odd. Um, Something on a little bit more of a personal point of view on how that path happened is sort of the rationale behind some of it. So I went on leave from the agency to go to law school,
Hmm.
and I was planning to go back to the agency. But then I met my wife, Laura, at law school, like you said, and we decided to raise a family. And the reason I didn't stick with the agency is because the way we wanted to raise family, it wasn't really compatible with working at the agency like I was going to. And so, in short, basically, that career, though I loved it, would have screwed up family life,
Right.
right? And it was like, okay, well, if we're gonna have kids, kids come first. So, okay, family life has to come first. So that's why then I went and became a lawyer in Milwaukee. So I was a DA for a while, like you said, and then went to a big law firm. And by the time I got to a big law firm, it was not a good job fit for me.
Hmm.
I really didn't like it, just the work, the nature of it. It was just not my thing. And
Right.
but so I didn't like it, and it was also going to mess up family life because you were required to work too much or be on call or work too much, and other people got to decide when. So you really weren't master of your own domain, kind of thing.
Right.
And so it was like, okay, now wait a second. At this point, I don't like my job, and it's going to mess up family life. It's like, okay, well, at the agency, I had messed up family life, but at least I like my job. Now I got neither. So why are we doing this? Like, so we went back to the drawing board. And it was actually my wife. I never had an entrepreneurial bug. I had,
Mm.
like, it never even crossed my mind. I mean, I worked for the government, as big as an employer as you can get, right, for most of
Right.
my career. And as my wife, it was sort of like, what about being our own bosses? Because we knew we wanted to have 4 kids. We only had one at that point. But we knew we wanted to have 4 kids. And it was like, we're under no illusions. If you're going to have your own business, you're going to have to work a lot, right? But that's okay if it's your own choice and it's on your own dime and it's for your own. I
Hmm.
mean, if everybody's sick and I need to be at home on a Wednesday, well, maybe I'll work next Sunday to make up for it. But that's like, it's our own choice. So she was the one with the idea of doing that. And then how the decision got made to then start the distillery was we thought, okay, well, we're going to do a lot of whatever it is we start a business. So we better like it.
Right?
So it was like, well, let's look at the things we like doing that you might be able to start a business out of. And I had a couple ideas actually that I think are really great business ideas. And then I looked at, okay, among these ideas, what are the cruxes of each? Like, what are the hardest parts of being successful in this or this or this? And how well do those line up with my strengths? And so, for starting a distillery, a lot of it is like figuring things out, like how to build something, how to make something that's a little bit more, a little bit more engineering, a little bit more hands-on, even though I'm not an engineer background. That's kind of a strength of mine. Is figuring that
Great.
kind of thing out. Whereas I had other business ideas that was like, well, the hard part of that is figuring out how to structure the financial relationship. It's like, that's not really my thing. Other people should do that, like, and then other people are great at that, but it's not really my strength. So that's part of the reason why we picked distillery.
I think that's really interesting. And I love the fact that your career path took the twisted path. I love that. That was a totally great way to name your business. And the other thing is, you took a very step-by-step approach to figuring out which business. So I think that the juxtaposition of both of those things is really, really unique and really, really interesting. So tell me, if you're willing to share a funny story that your family tells about you. Only if you're willing, though.
Hmm. All right, a story they tell about me.
And you can share with the.
Okay, well, yeah, a story they tell about, okay, here's one that's close. Here's a close to an answer. A funny thing that happens in our house quite a bit is we've got 4 little kids, 3 to 11, like you said. We also have 2 cats and a dog. And so something has developed in our house that we call a game called Poop or Rock. And it's basically, and we take turns playing it. And basically, somebody spots some little brown thing on a rug. And it's like, whose turn is it to play? Poop or rock? And you go over there and you're like, what is that? What is that? Oh, I don't know. I don't know. Let me grab a paper towel. Oh, it's just a fuzzball. Okay, I won.
That is
Sometimes,
hilarious.
but sometimes you lose.
Yes, of course, of course. That is hilarious. I love. That is really funny. So tell us a little more about Twisted Path Distillery.
Well, so we got into the origins of it, and then that idea, the Twisted Path name is actually not as narcissistic as it's like being about my career path. It's not really. It's a bigger concept than that. And
Right.
the idea that life is a path. That's sort of a Buddhist concept of life is a path. And we advocate following your own twisted path, as in, don't worry about conventional wisdom, do your own thing.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that be major life decisions, like we already talked about, like the arguably questionable ones we made, but all the way down to like any given problem or question or decision, sort of thinking outside of the box is sort of what's analogous to. It's sort of like, okay, how do we make a Bloody Mary, for example? How should we go about making a Bloody Mary? Okay, I'm looking at this cocktail. I made it from scratch. I didn't even use the washer. I looked at what's in the washer. I use that. You know what I'm saying? I made it from scratch. And it's like, what's the best way to make this drink? I see how everybody else makes Bloody Mary mix in tomato juice. I see how everybody does that, and then they add vodka. But why? Is that the best way? Maybe. Okay, then I do that. But I'm looking at it in the case of the Bloody Mary. I looked at it and was like, I don't see why that makes any sense at all. Right? Like, this cocktail, vodka, tomato juice, and then all the flavor things, herbs, spice, and salt and vinegar, stuff like
Right.
that. Why would you put them in the tomato juice? That's the perishable part. Then you need preservatives. The tomato juice actually breaks down the flavors of the herbs over like a week or two, and so it's muddy. Why not put it all in the vodka? It doesn't go bad, and it tastes way better because the tomato juice doesn't break down the flavor. So you just add that vodka to plain tomato juice. It's completely backwards from how everybody else does it, but it is solidly better. It is a better way to make it. anyway, I bring that up specifically just because it's a really good example of this idea of twisted path of like, okay, here's a question, here's a problem. And wait, now how does everybody else do it? And look at how everybody else does it as at best informative,
Right.
but not gospel. Just because everybody else is doing something some way doesn't mean it's the best way or the only way or the best way anymore or something like that. That's where innovation comes from. And that's sort of the cornerstone of Twisted Path is innovation because of this whole idea and the way we think. And then the people I hire all think this way too, right? So we have a flavor library. Thank you.
That is genius.
Yeah, and tasting is believing. You got to stop by because people like they hear it and they're like they're wowed by the concept, but then they taste it and they're like, oh, whoa, wait a second, that's really good.
That is genius. And I'm so excited that you're not very far from my house. That's awesome. Wow. So tell us where, a story of where someone pushed you or inspired you to say that you could do it and the impact that has had on you.
Pushed me or inspired me to think I could do it. I think the number one would be my wife. Mm-hmm. Is the one that, gave me the guts. I often say she's the one that had the courage to do it. Because, it's like, I certainly had people in my life that were like, well, why don't you get a job at a distillery first and do that for a few years? Sure. Yeah. And, Laura was very much like, you mean, like, you see these other people doing this and you mean you can't figure out how to do something that guy does? You can figure that out. I'm like, yeah, you're right. I mean, if this can be figured out, like none of this is rocket science, right? I could figure these things. That's just one step at a time, and that's like, that comes up a lot, the one step at a time thing.
Right.
So I went to Outward Bound when I was young, and actually, so this comes up in my head a lot. And we learned this in Outward Bound, which is, you're struggling to climb the mountain. Don't look at the top of the mountain.
Right.
Look 5 feet ahead.
Right.
I can take a couple more steps. Don't look at the top of the mountain. It's too intimidating.
Right. Exactly.
Right. So it was very much like that. She's like, don't look at the top of the mountain. Like, you can do this. Just figure it out. And that, she gave, there's a couple people, in my life like that, but my wife in particular, that gave me the courage that said,
yeah,
you can do
this. Making the leap from, a steady paycheck, working and things like that, making the leap to business owner takes a lot of courage. And, it's a big leap, right?
Yeah.
It's a leap into somewhat the unknown. And so, congratulations. That's awesome that you have such a great partner.
By the way, it's not the only leap. Yes. I think it's depending on the business and what it is and how you want it to go and everything. You keep leaping.
Yeah,
you keep having to take leaps. Just
exactly. So, most of the people that are going to be watching this are business owners. So, what's your biggest learning as a business owner?
I would say probably one of the biggest that it has an impact in everything I do now would be. Thinking of how to say this for a broader audience, the no a-hole rule.
Right.
There's a book, I think it's actually called that, except it spells out the word. But basically the concept of like, even if everything else lines up right, don't work with jerks.
Right.
Just, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. Like, so early on we learned it by making that mistake, unfortunately. We had, there was a company nearby that, was in a similar industry and had a ton of credibility, and they'd been in it for a little while, like certainly longer than I had and stuff. And they wanted to work together. And so on the paper, it really was a good fit to work together. There were some red flags on the personalities involved, but we did it anyway. And it bit us in the behind, something fierce, right? So it is one of those things that then they cheated us and they stole from us and then they bash us, they make up stories about us and like all this stuff that's just like, whoa, it is not worth it.
Learning lessons the hard way for sure, right?
Yes, you don't want to get in deep with people that you don't like and trust.
Right. Yep.
I
totally agree with you. Yes. Absolutely. So I know that has been a challenge. So is that your biggest challenge, or what was your biggest challenge over the course of the time? And who was or is a fellow business owner or colleague that helped you through that?
There are so many. So undoubtedly a big one that came up was COVID, right?
Yes.
So as a small distillery, we're now expanding in other states, but we were just Wisconsin at the time, and we have a big tasting room, and that had to close. So there's a loss of revenue, but no loss in rent due.
Hmm.
And we tried to keep our, personnel as much as we could, whatever. Um, so COVID was a challenge. Also, although everybody talks about how much more alcohol got drank at home, for the most part, people buying liquor at groceries and liquor stores, they fled to big brands in big bottles. There
Mm.
weren't a lot of people. There were also a lot fewer people being like, "Oh, what's this new craft thing? I'll try that." There wasn't a lot of that. There was like big jug in case I never leave the house again, And so it got hard. So we made the pivot to doing hand. Well, that's not why we made the pivot, but we immediately started making hand sanitizer because it seemed right at the beginning that the world needed it.
Mhm.
The community needed it. I
Yep.
mean, every distillery was getting 30 calls a day. Places like hospitals, the army, the police department, the fire department calling to be like, "Do you have sanitizer? We need all you can make." And we were the only people around that were agile enough. The giant factories take a while to spool up, right? And they
Sure.
were set up to just make just enough to satisfy demand pre-COVID. So to
Yeah.
change that takes months. So in the meantime, we're little guys, hand doing stuff, and we know how to deal
Right.
with high proof alcohol and stuff like that. So we were the only ones who could do it. And so on the topic of who helped through this, we really collaborated. There were several of us that saw this way. There's another distillery nearby. It's a family that has a different alcohol brand, and then they started Dancing Goat.
Mhm.
So they make whiskey. They're in Wisconsin. Those guys are super cool, and they were. I started. I used all my vodka to make hand sanitizer like immediately. But then
Right.
we needed more. We needed a lot more than we could make.
Right.
And it didn't have to taste good. It was just any alcohol, like high
Right.
proof alcohol is all we needed. And
Right.
so I called them up because they have a huge operation, and they were super cool. And they were like, "Yeah, you need neutral, you need neutral spirits. Like I got a tank for you. I'll send that your way." They were super cool. And then another distillery, 45th Parallel in New Richmond, over near the Twin Cities, but still Wisconsin. Paul was like he was like, "All right, everybody needs to make this hand sanitizer. We're different people are working out the alcohol part. We all need hydrogen peroxide to put in it. None of us have hydrogen peroxide. Buying little cans at the pharmacy's not working."
Yeah. Right.
So he bought a big tank of it up there and then shipped out smaller bits to all the
Wow.
distilleries making it. So it was like a very cooperative thing where we all pulled together. And that was pretty cool that we all just did because and we didn't do it at a profit actually. We broke even on it, I think. But it was like we're coming together to help the community. And then my staff is like in terms of actually getting through it monetarily.
Right.
Um, they pivoted to doing bottled cocktails,
Okay. Great.
and they champed out, and yeah, so really made a quick transition there to selling bottled cocktails to go from the front of the distillery. So
Wow.
that helped us get through it too.
Right.
And
I
then
mean,
our
I
fans,
love how
all these
you
loyal fans
pivoted.
that were like, we don't want them to go out of business.
Right.
We got to keep Twisted Path alive. We love their cocktails. Hey, they got bottled cocktails to go, so we don't even, they're like, this is a great way for me to support them, and I'll get some cocktails out. So like we have a lot of our regulars at the tasting room were just coming and buying way more bottled cocktails than they probably would have,
Right.
but just because they were like, we want to keep them going. So it's great.
I'm so excited. I love the story of pivoting when you had to, right? Pivoting to something
Yeah.
totally new that wasn't really what you were doing, but what
Mhm.
your processes could help that. I think that is genius, number one. Number two, I love the idea of cooperating all of the businesses. Uh, let's say they're considered competition
Yeah.
potentially. I
Yeah.
love the fact that you all cooperated with each other and helped each other out. I think that is a great story to tell.
I had a time, just on real quick one on that topic.
Yeah.
Um, I think the biggest distillery in town, the one that's been around the longest for sure, is the longest in the state, is Great Lakes Distillery.
Hmm.
So Guy Rayhorse runs that, super nice guy. Could easily look at me like, oh, here comes competition, but doesn't.
Right.
And I don't look at that way either. And so we know each other. I know the guys at Central Standard as well, the other one in town, and we're all buds. And I mean, there was one time when my boiler died that powers my still, and I was, at some guild meeting, a distillers guild meeting, where I see all these guys, and I was like, oh, my boiler died, and Guy Rayhorse of Great Lakes, he's a mile away or whatever, was like, hey, I just uninstalled a boiler that still works, but we just swapped it out or whatever, needed to get a bigger or whatever. And he's like, I've got a spare boiler. Like, if you want to try to get that and get it in, like, get it to work, just let me know. I didn't go down that road, but that's pretty cool.
That is really cool. I love that. Yeah. I love that. Plus, the products all of you make are yummy too. So yeah, it's a win-win-win, right?
Yeah.
So if you had to pick 3 people in your business journey that you are most grateful for being there for your business, who are they? I mean, you've listed lots and lots of people, which is awesome.
It's arguably not in the business world, but I think when you start your own business, you don't want to not think about how important the non-business world around you is too. And I would, one thing that pops into my head is my wife again, and her mother Maggie, my mother-in-law, have been my biggest cheerleaders all along. And that I think that's hugely helpful.
It is totally helpful. Yeah.
I think that's people that, there's a lot of road bumps. There's a lot of, driving into a ditch and having to get it back out and all that kind of stuff. And they, more than anybody, were really like, you got this. Oh, and one of their refrains was always, well, this is great because this is really hard to get through, but you will. It'll make it harder for other people to follow you.
Nice. I mean, how lovely is that? And we can never underestimate the power of that kind of encouragement, right? Because as business owners, we all need that.
Yeah.
No, that's wonderful. Anybody else?
I mean, I had all kinds of colleagues that, what we call them, Laura and I always refer to them as door openers. People that just whatever world they're in, and I can't name a couple people, but their attitude in meeting somebody is, how can I help you? And then of course you want to reciprocate and be like, and how can I help you? And people that are just, that's their attitude, is like, wait, I know a guy that can help. Let me link you up with a friend of mine, and it's just door openers. They're like trying to figure out how to make everything work. I have some friends friends at Top Note Tonic. They were a tonic company actually that were started out in the same building that my distillery is in, Noah and Mary, and so it's a non-alcoholic mixer. So classic tonic, but they have gentian.
I just interviewed her on Monday.
Oh, okay. So Mary, yeah. Oh yeah, she's great. And
small world, isn't it?
We've always, yes, a small world, and particularly beverage. And then we've always talked to each other, and talk things back and forth, or do cooperative, promotion things. And then of course we use their tonic in the tasting room, and then, it's just, and on the business end of things, I've always I'd hit them up and be like, hey, do you know a good PR person, or, or hey, do you, and vice versa, there's stuff like that all the time. That's a good example.
That's great. So what's the next big thing for you and your business?
The next big thing is possibly a real pivot in the business model from we are doing, is basically based on that bloody vodka, which we explained. It's this totally novel thing. And in the booze industry, there's not a lot of completely new things that really fill a hole in the market. They call them white spaces, right? There's a hole in the market. Right now, Bloody Marys are either easy or great. They're not both. This is both. And so that's it's a big hole, and nobody's ever done it. And so we're talking about, we're starting to work on doing is switching from just sort of a small family business model that's completely bootstrapped, and we're just kind of growing right around Wisconsin, in Wisconsin, and maybe right next to Wisconsin next, and switching to a business model that's really more growth driven, where we get investors. We're looking for investors and strategic partners to really take the bloody vodka on a much more national scale is the goal.
Great.
And really grow it. I firmly believe, like if you taste it, you believe me. Compared to any bloody mix with vodka in it, it's just vastly better, and it's non-perishable. So it really should have a significant chunk of the Bloody Mary market, and that's a huge thing. So, but we're going to need help doing it. I can't, right now, there's people in startups, they talk about the management team or the executive team. They're like, well, that's me.
Right.
So I need a bigger team. So I'm starting to talk to people that have, I've just met somebody that recently sold a distillery business, and he looks like he's going to be on board because he tasted it and was like, oh my God, I want in on this. Yeah, so we're looking at going down that road of a switch of a business model.
That's awesome.
To a high growth, more startup model, sort of built around the bloody.
Sure. So the biggest challenge with that, you mentioned a couple things. What do you think is the biggest challenge with that?
The biggest challenge is finding the right people and finding the right connection, as far as I can tell so far. It's finding them.
Yeah.
How do you, I mean, I can find people that already have a job doing what I need somebody to do, but I found them because they're already doing it.
Yep.
I need somebody that has the skills, the connections, the expertise, the whatever, that isn't currently doing it, or at least not full time enough that they can't help us. So finding people, finding those connections in this business, there's a lot of just gatekeeping.
Yes.
Of just like in going around selling for these spirits, particularly the bloody and the chai. If I can actually get the decision maker to sit down and taste these things, they're in. Like almost always. Like it is just, they're like, oh my God, this is amazing. But getting them there and getting them to sit down and getting them to taste is really hard, particularly when it comes to chains and like bigger, I can go into a place and get the bartender to taste if I hang around enough, and they love it. And then they're like, email the office because he's the decision maker. Well, those people don't return emails.
Right. Right.
That's just like, it never works. So that's probably one of the hardest things. So I think going forward, it'll probably be finding those right connections, finding those right people to get in the right doors.
Yeah.
And I think the product will speak for itself once it gets to speak.
Yeah, right. And a taste means everything. I used to own an olive oil store, and once people tasted the olive oil and balsamic, you had them. It was getting them to do it, right? So that's fabulous. So what advice would you have for the business owner who's trying to do it on their own?
Don't underestimate those other aspects that you're not focused. Like I know me, like I'm a guy who, I think a lot of small business owners like start out as like there's a person, particularly manufacturing of some sort, like person who likes to make things, like, oh well, it's like I love to bake, so I'm gonna start a bakery. Like, okay, awesome. That's super cool. Don't underestimate how hard the other aspects of it are. Like, it's not if you bake it, they will come situation necessarily, no matter how good the cookies are.
Right.
You gotta figure out the marketing, the finance, the sales stuff, like all that other stuff. In this business, where the sales and marketing is just
right. Exactly. And people who don't know how to do that and they're trying to do it on their own, that's a long road. That is a really long, and it's very long and very expensive too. So, well, Brian, it sounds like you've been really blessed with incredible people that have helped you on your journey. What would you like to say to them?
I mean, thank you.